Have you ever stumbled upon a place so utterly enchanting, so sensually charged? It felt like stepping into a dream woven from your deepest desires. That's exactly what happened to our storyteller, Ivy. Not her real name, of course. Though after what transpired that night, can we blame her for seeking anonymity? It all began with an invitation that arrived on a Tuesday evening when the sunset painted her apartment in hues of amber and gold. This wasn't your ordinary Evite to Susan's potluck, or your cousin's casual barbecue. Absolutely not. It was an elegant, handwritten invitation on paper, so luxuriously thick, it felt like velvet between her fingers. Adorned with gold filigree and an embossed rose that seemed to retain the faintest hint of perfume, the card bore Ivy's name in calligraphy that flowed like dark honey across the page. The message was simple, but achingly alluring. You are cordially invited to spend an evening in the Forbidden Garden. Come alone. Come curious. Neither an address nor a sender's name was included, just coordinates below the tantalizing script, and a time. Midnight. Coordinates. As though she were being summoned to a treasure rather than a place. Who does that? Someone who understands the seductive power of mystery. That's who. Naturally, Ivy couldn't resist. What woman could? The night of the invitation arrived with a warm breeze that caressed her skin like a promise. She chose her attire carefully, a silk dress the color of burgundy wine that clung to her curves before flowing freely past her hips, strappy heels that made her legs look endless, and just a touch of perfume at her wrists and throat. Preparation is a ritual, after all, especially when venturing into the unknown. Curiosity overtook her as she followed the directions, the night air heavy with the promise of something unforgettable. The coordinates led her down winding country roads until her headlights illuminated a path flanked by towering hedges, so perfectly manicured they seemed unreal. At its end stood a cast-iron gate with roses intertwined through the metalwork, their blooms impossibly lush even in the darkness. Standing before it, she could spot glimpses of what lay beyond, twinkling fairy lights suspended among leaves like captured stars, roses climbing trellises in defiance of gravity, and the unmistakable sense of magical isolation. But as she hesitated, one hand raised to knock, the gate creaked open of its own accord, an invitation within an invitation. The garden that greeted her was straight from the pages of a forbidden fantasy, the kind you don't admit to having. Strings of warm lights crisscrossed above, casting everyone beneath them in the most flattering glow. Laughter like velvet, and music that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to her body floated through the perfumed air. At the center stood a fountain, its waters dyed a glowing crimson that captured and reflected light like liquid rubies. Everything glistened, as though sprinkled with bottled moonlight, and the guests, oh the guests. Men and women dressed in finery that bordered on costumery, their faces partially obscured by intricate masks, moved through the space with languid grace. Some reclined on plush divans beneath gauzy canopies, feeding each other berries and sipping champagne from crystal flutes. Others danced with a slow intimacy that made Ivy's breath catch. And then she saw him. Sebastian, or so he introduced himself, though with a name that perfect, spoken in a voice that rich, it had to be an alias. When I say this man redefined smoldering, I mean he could thaw glaciers with a glance. Jet black hair styled with just enough carelessness to suggest fingers had recently run through it, stubble so perfect it looked like it was painted on by a Renaissance artist who specialized in sin, and eyes the color of whiskey held up to firelight. He approached with the confident grace of a predator who doesn't need to rush. His prey is already entranced. Taking her hand, he raised it to his lips, and though the kiss he pressed to her knuckles was chaste, the promise in his eyes was anything but. "Welcome to the Forbidden Garden," he said, his deep voice resonating through her body like the lowest note on a cello. "I've been waiting for you." They exchanged no more than a few pleasantries. It was mostly eye contact that did the talking. the kind of unbroken gaze that feels like undressing in the most delicious way. Sebastian led her deeper into the garden, where the atmosphere somehow became both more intimate and more charged. Some guests reclined on velvet cushions beneath canopies of flowers that shouldn't bloom at night yet somehow did. Others stood in small groups, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter musical and inviting. But despite the crowd, Ivy felt isolated with Sebastian, as though they moved within their own pocket of reality. His hand at the small of her back guided her with gentle pressure, his fingertips occasionally brushing bare skin in a way that could have been accidental, but most definitely wasn't. "Do you trust me?" Sebastian asked, his voice lowering to a murmur meant only for her. A loaded question, absolutely, and in any other circumstance, with any other man, the answer would have been a firm no. But Ivy, caught under a hedonistic spell woven from moonlight, perfume, and the heat radiating from his body, nodded anyway. The next thing she knew, he was leading her along winding paths where roses bloomed in colors nature never intended, past fragrant blooms that seemed to lean in as though listening to secrets, and stopped before a secluded alcove hidden by a curtain of weeping willow branches. By this point, if Ivy's heart wasn't threatening to escape her chest, if her skin wasn't hypersensitive to every brush of fabric, then trust me, she possessed self-control beyond mortal measure. The alcove revealed an antique love seat upholstered in midnight blue velvet, surrounded by lanterns that cast dancing shadows against the greenery. As they sat, the cushions shifted, bringing them inevitably closer. Sebastian's thigh pressed against hers, warm and solid. When he leaned in to kiss her, it wasn't the tentative exploration of a first kiss. It was confident, knowing, as though he'd mapped her desires before they'd even met. The kiss deepened, his hands finding the curve of her waist, the arch of her neck, leaving trails of heat in their wake. Ivy felt herself melting into him, boundaries blurring like watercolors. And just when she thought the evening would take the most deliciously predictable turn, he broke the kiss to whisper, "Look up." Hovering above them was something Ivy will never forget. A vine wrapping around branches, forming an arch that framed what appeared to be a doorway to somewhere else. Not a physical door, but a shimmering distortion in the air, like heat rising from summer pavement, only vertical and pulsing with an inner light that shifted between colors she couldn't quite name. She couldn't look away, and, as Sebastian explained, his lips brushing the shell of her ear with each word, she wouldn't want to. What lay beyond was her choice to make. "Everyone who enters the Forbidden Garden faces this choice," he said, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Stay here with me, with the pleasures you can see and feel and taste." His eyes dropped meaningfully to her lips. "Or step through to discover what lies beyond comprehension. Ecstasies that transcend the physical, mysteries that answer questions you haven't thought to ask." Ivy's breath came quicker now, her mind racing with possibilities. Sebastian's proximity, the heat of his body, the lingering taste of him on her lips, all urged her to stay. But the shimmering doorway called to something deeper, a curiosity that burned as intensely as desire. Did she step through that doorway? Well, let's just say Ivy's tale ends with the most wickedly satisfied smile I've ever seen, and a message she sent me. "Thanks for sharing my story, Stella. But even you don't deserve to know what's on the other side. Some pleasures are beyond words, and some secrets are worth keeping." And there you have it, a tale of seduction, mystery, and a garden I definitely need to find coordinates for. Have a story of your own to share? Drop me a line, and perhaps your tale will be the next forbidden adventure I'll tell. Until then, remember, the most exquisite pleasures often lie just past the boundaries of what we think we want. Sweet dreams, darlings. Or better yet, deliciously wicked ones.